Morning, everybody. Welcome to Desert Highlands, and again, the midweek recharge. We finished our study through the book of Jonah, and now we are, let's see where I'm looking. I'm going to look properly here. So I'm looking at people instead of staring off into space. We're actually going to start our study of the book of Joshua. Now, Joshua is a fascinating subject because Joshua, of course, being the heir apparent to Moses. And so as we finish the first 5 books written by Moses of the Old Testament that ends with Deuteronomy, we skip into Joshua. Now, a little bit on authorship just for a second. We'll kind of explain the scene of how we got here, and then we can jump actually in Joshua chapter 1. But the author of the book of Joshua is most likely Joshua himself, because the text seems to indicate that. And of course, a lot of it is providing some very personal insights of only one who was experiencing the events as they happened. That would have been the one who could make reference to some of those things. So how did we get here as Joshua takes over for Moses? Well, remember, of course, the people of Israel. And the Bible tells us they have the Jacob, who would be Israel. His small family of just a handful becomes a nation of 2 to 3 million people. And the Bible tells us that there was a time when Egypt, there was no one left in Egypt who remembered Joseph. And Joseph, as governor of Egypt, had saved Egypt from a certain famine that would have cost hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives, and in the storing up of food and that kind of thing. But there was a time when that's forgotten. And understand that this small family unit over centuries becomes a nation, as God promised Abraham he would bring, a nation from his ancestor, from his descendants, I should say, a nation of 2 to 3 million people. Egypt, over the years, takes a look at that group, who they had offered to live in the fertile land of Goshen on the eastern side of the Egyptian empire, and said, feel free, go ahead and live there. But after multiple generations over centuries, they're not sure they like this huge amount of people that's living next to them. And so it's clear from the Bible that they were not enslaved that entire time, but they certainly were oppressed during that entire time, probably motivated by a lot of fear. And because of that fear, eventually the people of Israel are enslaved by the Egyptians. And so that's where Moses comes into the part. Raised as an Egyptian, though he was a Jew, he experiences a serious situation where he actually kills an Egyptian taskmaster. And then he runs off to Midian and starts a different life. God calls him back. He is a kind of a Christ-like figure. He comes back, and basically through the plagues of Egypt, the punishment of God, he convinces Pharaoh through God's miraculous power to let his people go. So they do. And we come to our miraculous story of the parting of the Red Sea, and coming through, you see that route. If you look at a map about the actual route that the Israelites take, it's through into the Sinai Peninsula, down to the bottom, the base of Sinai, at Mount Sinai, where the 10 Commandments are given, and then up to the north, a brief kind of move to the east, and then they kind of venture up. Well, the people of Israel, at this point, they're ready to enter the land of Canaan. And this trek that should have taken just a handful of days has taken a little bit longer. In fact, as they were ready to enter the land of Canaan before, the people of Israel, if you remember your story, took 12 spies, one representative from each family, each tribe, and they go in to check out the land of Canaan. And 2 of those spies come back and say, it's beautiful. It's everything God promised. Truly a land flowing with milk and honey. Let's go take it as God commands. But the other 10 spies say, whoa, giants, dangers, scary time. And so most of the people of Israel vote, no, we're not going, we're scared. So that is actually the punishment. Not all the complaining, not all of the whining, not all of the requests, even if you'll follow the text throughout a lot of Leviticus, Deuteronomy, a lot of people are just saying, let's go back. God has brought us out to the desert to die. So let's actually go back to slavery in Egypt. So even all of that God overlooks. But when they finally decide, no, I'm not going in and taking what you want for us, then finally God decides to punish. And so those from that current generation, including Moses, don't get to see the promised land. And so as they die off, a wandering in the desert of approximately 40 years. And then when the new generation comes upon, God says, okay, so let's start over. Let's go in and take the land of Egypt, or the land of Canaan. And so what happens is Joshua is put in charge, and he is ready to lead his people, and God has mandated it. So what he does basically is he assumes that mantle. A little bit about Joshua. He is a warrior. He is described as Moses' aide. He is also described, because he is, as Moses' heir apparent. He is both leader and humble servant. In many ways, he's ideal for the position, but of course, he spent many years as the number 2, as the runner-up, in a sense. So he's been well humbled to the position, but maybe too much, as we see at the start of Joshua, because God is encouraging him to take the mantle. And so as Joshua is ready to take on his position as leader, let's take a look at that next slide. Joshua, this strapping, powerful warrior type, immediately God is talking about probably what Joshua needs to hear. And that is something that's mentioned 3 times in the first 10 verses of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. So let's go ahead and take a look. Verse 1 of Joshua chapter 1. You have your Bibles ready? You ready to go? Let's do this. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, doesn't mean he didn't have a dad, means that was the name of dad, Nun, N-U-N, Moses' aide, Joshua is described. Verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. So understand the route that they have taken. They've gone up the right-hand side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River that springs out the top. And they're to the right of that. They're about to cross to the western side, the west bank of the Jordan River. And God says, I'm giving this whole land to you. In fact, he'll describe the land that he was giving to Abraham, their descendant, their ancestor. Verse 3, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Verse 4, your territory will extend from the desert, the Saudi Arabian desert, actually, to the great river, the Euphrates, and all the Hittite country. That includes the city of Jericho that we'll reference as well, to the Mediterranean Sea to the west. Verse 5, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. God is basically saying, Joshua, before he even says, be strong and courageous, he's saying these are plenty of reasons to be strong, to be of good courage, knowing I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to leave you behind. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, he says, because you will lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to give their ancestors to them. So this huge swath of land, this is part of the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. This includes the desert all the way down Saudi Arabia. This is all the land that God promised Abraham. Now, it doesn't come to fruition because the people of Israel end up just settling for a small sliver that's right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. That is our modern understanding of where Israel is. So be strong and courageous, he says. This is the land I plan to give to them. Verse 7. Again, be strong and very courageous. There's a message that God is sending here. Isn't that interesting? All the law my servant Moses gave you, be careful to obey it. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, and what you may be successful wherever you go. He's not talking about perfect adherence to the law, but what he is talking about is do as you are told. Yes, there are provisions that have been set aside. The sacrificial system is in place. When you sin before the Lord, there's forgiveness to be had. To come before the Lord when you sin, to make sacrifice, to give a portion of what you make and what you earn and what you raise, to offer sacrifice to the Lord when you sin for your family as well as for yourself. There are provisions for that imperfection that were there for the people. And yet, don't get too far off to the right or the left. Stay on the course, obeying the rules that God has set down. Verse 8, keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Remember, of course, when God talks about prosperous and successful, he has a different kind of judgment as to what that looks like. But God does seek to prosper his people in the best way possible for them. Not necessarily in the way that we might envision it, but in the way that is best for us. He says, do everything written in it. And again, he's not talking about perfect obedience, but he is talking about keeping your mindset on the things of God. As he says, it must be meditate with this always on your lips, always on your mindset. Deuteronomy chapter 6 talks about let it adorn your life, the law of God. Let the things of God be constantly on your mind, not to distract yourself so much with other ideas, other thoughts. This is actually a good thing to think about for the modern world, because we as Christians have so many other things that we can actually busy ourselves with and that we can complicate life with. And part of that is to not let distraction come into our lives, that we are truly meditating on the Word of God day and night. We're not treating our belief in God as a hobby. We're treating it as a lifestyle. We need to adopt a lifestyle of worship. And for some recent converts to Christianity, that's kind of a foreign concept. We think that the end of the road is deciding to follow Jesus, when actually it's the beginning of the road. And so a lifestyle of worship is what God covets. A lifestyle where we are meditating on things day and night. It's the reason why churches, those good Bible-believing Christian churches, will actually do communion once a month or maybe every week to remind people of the sacrifices of Jesus. It's why we do baptism, to remind people you're a new creature in Christ and you need to be held accountable for the life that you have chosen to live. So these are all good things. Not that there's some sort of mysticism or some sort of magical power in these things, but they are good reminders of where our mind ought to be. And this is a reminder from God to Joshua, to be the leader I want you to be. And what you tell the people is to spend your time meditating on my law. Understand the spirit of what I intend to have in your life. And follow it. Think on these things. Focus on these things. Verse 9, have I not commanded you? This is the third time he's mentioned this, and this is one of my life verses. This is one of my favorite verses in all the scripture, friends. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Friends, this is not just intended for Joshua. It is primarily intended for Joshua. But this is a truism about God and everyone who follows him with their life. When God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses, this was never intended to be a follow these rules and you will be justified before me. It was always intended, as Moses brought those down from Mount Sinai, it was intended for people to look at that and say, wait, but I can't do that. I'm not able to accomplish those things. And with that reality, God would say, yes, you need me. You need me because you are imperfect. You cannot reach heaven, so I have brought heaven down to you. And finally, that would see fruition when Jesus Christ was born, lived his ministry, died on the cross for people's sins, and was risen on the third day. That plan of God was put into motion from the first person to be born and the first person to actually commit a sin. That plan to redeem mankind was born at that time, and it carries through to the time of Jesus Christ. We're not there yet, but Joshua is a typology of Christ. He's an example of Christ. In fact, he is the current Redeemer. Moses is a type of Christ. It is that Redeemer that God brings to bring his people to the place that they need to be. Ultimately, each of these persons, Joshua being one of them, is a promise that one day someone will come superior to all of them, who will one day put this issue of sin to rest. And that's what Jesus has done. He will be with you wherever you go. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, this is a promise to you as well. God promises that he will never abandon you. It will always be with you. But remember that Ten Commandments, the symbology of the law of God, that symbolic nature of the Ten Commandments, it was only supposed to show you your need for God and God's expectations. And in fact, a very logical response would be, oh, I can't do that. And God says, perfect. That's exactly right. You need me, ultimately. Verse 10, so Joshua ordered the officers of the people. Verse 11, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. He says, we're ready to go. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Verse 12. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you the rest by giving you this land. Verse 14, your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan. But all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them, verse 15, until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you. And until they too have taken possession of the land, the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Now, of course, friends, those who truly disobeyed and who misbehaved were, of course, the previous generation that died out in the desert. And Moses, of course, he himself wasn't allowed to see the promised land because of his own sin, his own disobedience. It may seem harsh, but God really wants to get this in, that you need to be doing the letter of what I tell you. Well, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and Manasseh, half of what would have been the tribe of Joseph, Joseph's sons, they come to Moses privately and say, you know what, we don't need to cross the Jordan. We're good here on the east bank of the Jordan. Now, friends, Moses okays this, but he's not happy about it, and neither is God. Not that God is surprised, but this is another compromise. This is, we don't want the best that God wants for us. We're going to decide on our own what we think is good enough. The whole problem with the way the Israelites obey here, now Joshua is filled with faithful demonstrations of that very faith, that trust in God. We're going to do things your way, God. But at the same time, we see across the entire nation of Israel, across the entire people group, we see just a very kind of a typology. It's an example of what human beings do. We're just going to settle. We're going to settle for this. And then we're going to be upset at God that we don't appreciate and experience the fullness of his plan, right? God, I'm going to do my Christian walk halfway, but I'm going to be upset with you that I don't feel your love in my heart. I'm going to do Christianity halfway, but I'm going to be upset that I don't really feel the peace that you talk about. I'm going to kind of do my Christian walk as a hobby, but yet I'm going to be a little upset with you, God, because I don't feel your call upon my life, what I should do with my life, where I should go, how I should do it, who I should be with. Well, friends, he says, obey me because he knows best and because he loves you. He loved the people of Israel. And when they settled for the part of the east of the Jordan, they say, no, we will fulfill our obligation. We will send our fighting men with you. We will complete the conquest, which they never did, by the way. We will complete the conquest, and then we will go back to our land. And not just these tribes, but all the tribes of Israel failed to finish the combined conquest of Canaan. And I would argue that there are consequences for that even today with the modern people of Israel. Verse 16, then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. This sounds very similar to the previous generation when they said, may it be on our heads, we will do exactly what the Lord tells us to do, as Moses presented the 10 commandments to the people. We'll do it, and we'll accept your judgment if we don't. Well, they were complaining nearly the next day about God's provision. They were complaining that the bread from heaven that was falling wasn't good enough. They were complaining that the bird meat that God supplied wasn't good enough. They were complaining that they could not stockpile it, that they had to trust God for its provision each day. Whine and complain and whine. Well, that generation isn't here, but yet we are seeing the same selfish sin patterns in their descendants, in their children. So people don't really change, do they? We still have our need of God. Verse 17, just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you, they say to Joshua. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word, this is heavy talk, right? These are serious words, and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous, right? So this is strong words from the Lord, using the other tribes, saying whoever does not obey, who's not willing, they'll be put to death. He once again says, God says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Now, just thinking about strength and courage, there's every reason to believe that Joshua was a strong guy. He was a warrior. He was a soldier. He commanded men in battle. He was also a courageous man. He was one of the 12 spies that was sent initially into Canaan. He and Caleb were the lone spies that said, let's do it. Let's obey God. Let's charge in there. Let's take the land that God has promised us. While the other 10 kind of wilted away and was talking about the fear that they had of the land that they had not yet taken. So you would think that the last person who needs to be reminded 4 times here in the first 18 verses, to be strong and courageous. Well, friends, understand that Joshua's taking on a new role, isn't he? He's not just the assistant. He's not just the aide. He's not just the general following the leader's commands. He's actually in charge. He's the boss now. And of course, he's carrying out the commands of God, but he is the one whose responsibility it is now. That's a different role. And although Joshua has shown himself to be strong, not just physically strong, but strong in character, he has also shown himself to be courageous, brave at difficult times, scary times. He's reminded that these are going to be important, but not to be strong and courageous within his own abilities, his own talents and gifts. He's asked to be strong and courageous in his total trust of God. He's told to be obedient. He's told to meditate on the law day and night. He says, don't let it depart from your lips. Not only are you living out this life yourself, Joshua, but you are actually showing an example for the rest of the nation. So God reminds him of this several times, of who he'll have to trust with the challenges of the coming weeks and days. Not just fighting battles, but leading a whole nation of people. So we come to chapter 2. And we have the story of two more spies that are sent into the land of Canaan. Verse 1 of chapter 2, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. Now, to understand Jericho, Jericho is on the west bank of the Jordan River. So as they came up the east bank, past the Dead Sea and the following of the Jordan River, the best way to cross, or the smallest part, is right on the other side of Jericho. Jericho is a mighty walled city. It carries a Hittite mercenary army. It is a mighty port of call, and it can't be avoided. You can't just kind of skirt around it, avoid it somehow. It is truly the gatekeeper of the land of Canaan. So Jericho has to be dealt with. And so he says, I'm sending some spies. I'm going to check this out. Since I've never been to Jericho myself, I've only heard the stories. But Jericho has to be dealt with. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Who is Rahab? Well, Rahab is as it says, a prostitute, but she's more than that. She's an innkeeper. She's a businesswoman. She is also, in a sense, a priestess, because she does her sexual acts actually in religious rituals, part of the gods of the Canaanites. And she can't be terribly happy about it, because the way that she responds to the spies, and we're going to see that here. So clearly we meet a person who is, well, really living a very difficult life, a very decayed life. And yet at the same time, she knows there must be something different, must be something better. So she responds this way. And the king of Jericho is told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. The king of Jericho, likely a Hittite. He's opulent. He has great wealth. He decides all that happens in the almost independent state of Jericho. And he commands the soldiers, the Hittites. The Hittites were known for being professional warriors. It was part of their culture. And so this was a formidable group of people. Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. Verse 3. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Rahab was probably very well known in the town because of all the religious rituals she participated in. Like I said, a local businesswoman, a prostitute. Bring out the men who came to see you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. It's not likely that anybody could have gone into her place of residence without anybody knowing. And so these two men, these two strangers that no one has seen before, they see them enter Rahab's dwelling. And so they figure out very quickly that they're Hebrew spies, that they're Israelite spies. Verse 4, but the woman, meaning Rahab, had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. Rahab lies to the king, and she seems to be pretty confident in doing that. Not because she's not afraid, but she's being, what's the word? Courageous. Despite what she knows what could happen to her and the loved ones she has with her, she is still willing to follow what she believes to be correct, what she believes to be right. Also, we're going to find that Rahab is very practical, because the whole city-state of Jericho is quaking in their boots about this legend, these Israelites that are coming, this nation. They're scared to death of these people. And so Rahab is thinking, there's no way. They have a better way. They're more powerful. I need to be on the right side of this thing. There's a very practical mindset to this as well. And she says, yes, the men came here, but I did not know where they had come from. Verse 5, at dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, right, just before the sun goes down at dusk, they left. This is still Rahab's words. I don't know which way they went. She lies again. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. Very clever. So what she does is she sends the security forces, probably Hittite soldiers, off to run down these spies, because the authorities, especially the king of Jericho, he's afraid that they're going to report back. Whatever they have discovered, whatever weaknesses they have been able to glean from the city of Jericho and its defenses, they will report back to this Israelite nation. Now remember, guys, this is why the Hebrews, the Israelites, Hebrew is really more the language. I shouldn't refer to them that way, but some nations did refer to them as Hebrews. But the Israelite nation, as they left Egypt, one of the reasons Egypt was so afraid of them is because of their numbers, their sheer numbers. There was no army at the time that could contend with a people group of 2 to 3 million people. So the fear was understandable. Now, many of those are women and children, and traditionally there were no women soldiers in those days, although there must have been exceptions, right? But mostly the men out of a nation of 3 million people must have been staggering, that a number of men who could be equipped for battle. And we're told by the scriptures that that was numbering of 600,000 men, both with the original group and then their descendants, of course, their sons and their daughters. 600,000 fighting men who were ready to do battle. There was no army at the time that could contend with that. Not that the Hebrews or the Israelites were known for their fighting, but they had already experienced military victories. They had wiped out nations at the southern tip of the Canaanite lands. And of course, those stories have become legendary. And like a fish story, they probably became more grand depending upon who was telling it. So the people inside of Jericho are nervous. They're scared. So she plays on their fears. And she sends the Hittite soldiers, the security men from Jericho. Catch up to them quickly. You just missed them. Verse 6, but she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. Just think of wheat stacks that are tied together. So she actually has them lay down, and then she lays out these flax stalks, actually, as if they're like coverings for the roof. So she covers them up, not thinking that they'll be searching on the top of the roof. Verse 7, so the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So they're serious about this. They close the gate after these men leave. Verse 8, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, verse 9, and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us. So she references the fear. So that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. She says something interesting there. Fear is not simply regulated to the city of Jericho, but the entire Hittite lands and beyond are afraid of this huge nation of people that is, in a sense, invading. Not just in a sense. They are. They're invading this land. They have crossed the West Bank. They were a danger when they were on the east side of those waters, near the Tigris and Euphrates. And this, remember, this is all land that God promised to Abraham, but only part of it will end up being conquered by the Israelite people group. So that all that live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Fear doesn't mean you totally collapse, but melting in fear, what kind of image does that show? That shows someone who is almost refusing to stand up and be counted against a threat. They're melting away in fear. Verse 10, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. Well, parted it for sure, right? For you, when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. That probably scared the people of the Hittite nations and the Canaanite nations even more than anything else. The Amorites were a mighty people group, mighty armies, and they were wiped out. And when we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Do you see why Rahab actually is such an important figure? She is convinced not only of the might of the people of Israel, but she's convinced that God, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Israelites, is the God of creation. He's the God of gods. And she may not be convinced that there are no other gods, but she is convinced that he is the ultimate God, that he is the mightiest of any gods. So she believes not necessarily that this people group is so mighty, but that the God they serve is more powerful than any. And so there's a very practical side to all this. He is God in heaven above and on earth below. What else is there? There is no other third option, is there? On heaven, on earth, God is God. He is mighty, he is the Lord, and there is no equal. That's what Rahab is saying. Rahab is on the cusp of having her own very real faith. And so it's obvious why Rahab is trusted here. Verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign, verse 13, that you will spare the lives of my mother and father, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Rahab asked something very reasonable, that you wouldn't wipe me out as you wipe out this entire city. She's confident that'll happen. She's not even questioning it. Even though Jericho has mighty walls, even though it has a powerful army backing it, even though it is opulent, it's a center of trade, it's a common marketplace. People come to make, money changers and businessmen there at Jericho rich because they have access to monies, people that are willing to buy. In verse 14, the spies say this, our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we're doing, if you don't reveal our secrets, if you don't show where we've gone or what we've found out, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. Verse 15. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. So just imagine a window, right, as you can see in the picture there, a window that is flush with the city wall. And so essentially they're just let out the outside of the city, where it would have been impossible for them to maneuver their way through. God leads them to this woman, not only a woman who is developing her faith in God, but also who is in perfect position to help them. Coincidence? Yeah, I don't think so. Of course, God knew exactly what he was doing. So that close proximity to the outside of the wall, she's able, to let them down out of this rope off these tall city walls. Verse 16. She said to them, go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Again, another clever strategy from Rahab, as she says, don't try to traverse the distance back to your people. Go to the hills, where they will not search for you there. And when the Hittite men come back, having not found you, and the course back to your people, they won't engage your people. They'll come back to the safety of the walls, and once they come inside those walls after 3 days, having given up the search, then you can go safely back to your people. Go your way. Verse 17, now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, verse 18, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord. So think a bright red tie or rope woven together, very obvious from the outside wall. That in the window which you let us down, unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers and all your family into your house. Verse 19, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. It won't be our responsibility if they get out of your dwelling. They need to stay here for their own safety, protected by that red sash, because we'll know it's you. From the outside, it will be very obvious as we approach the city, which is your dwelling. and we'll spread the word on this. We will not be responsible if they do not follow our instructions. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our heads if a hand is laid on them. So their promise of protection. But as long as you follow our instructions, Rahab, keep your family and your loved ones with you in this dwelling when we come to attack. Verse 20, but if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Verse 21, let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord to her window. So Rahab agrees. She agrees to do as the Hebrew spies have suggested, and she gathers them in to her dwelling in anticipation of this attack that will probably happen within days. And when they left, verse 22, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. They actually listened to what Rahab had suggested, and it serves them well. Verse 23, then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. Verse 24, they said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Well, of course, the people weren't melting in fear because they feared the people of Israel necessarily, but they feared their deeds. They feared their numbers. They feared what they could do to them. And Jericho, this mighty city, this gateway city that had kept out probably a number of invaders before, now feels itself helpless to defend itself against this mighty nation that is coming. And now they are in fear. They are in constant fear. Friends, when we act courageously, we are strong in our trust of God. It's amazing how many obstacles will in fear recoil from us. Doesn't mean you're not going to have difficulty in this life. The book of James says, consider it all joy when you encounter trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith produces endurance. But yet, even as Christians, we know when we cannot follow the Lord's commands perfectly, we still endeavor to do so. But friends, that takes, very clearly from this example given to Joshua, that takes meditating on God's expectations on a regular basis. What are we to do? Are we simply to recount the 10 Commandments all the time? Be talking about them every day? No, but we are to be remembering daily thinking about what Jesus Christ has done for you. Now, Joshua, again, as I said before, will serve as a typology of Christ. But he is, in his own way, he is still flawed. He is still imperfect. We, you and I, have the possibility of knowing Jesus Christ. And if you've given your life to Jesus, you know that you can be, even if you haven't practiced it yet, you can be strong and courageous with the promises of God. He promises never to leave you, never to forsake you. He asks you to be strong and courageous, not because you are so powerful or I am so powerful, because none of us are, but that he is powerful, he is mighty, and the plans he has for us are for the good, for your good, for your loved one's good, and for the kingdom of heaven, ultimately, to be glorified among people. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll look at chapter 3 next week, and tonight at 7 p.m. we'll have a replay of this very same study. I'll be with you live to answer your questions and interact with you. Hope you'll drop by and say hi, ask your questions and get those answered, or maybe suggest something that we hadn't thought about. We've kind of run through the first 2 chapters here very quickly, so there certainly are some details that we did not highlight, and you can bring those to our attention as well. So we'll hope you'll join us tonight at 7 p.m., and especially if you missed this 9:30 a.m. time together. Well, friends, this has been the Midweek Recharge at Desert Highlands Baptist Church. Again, if you are looking for a church yourself, we don't want to drag you away from yours. But if you are not actually part of a local body, we invite you to Desert Highlands Baptist Church, 10:30 a.m. every Sunday, 40027 11th Street West in Palmdale. Hope to see you there. God bless you and have a wonderful week.